I didn't want to go. That was the first honest thought I had, while buttoning my son's jacket in the mirror by the door. He watched himself concentrate on the buttons the way he always did, tongue pressed lightly to the corner of his mouth. When he finished, he looked up at me for approval, already bracing for correction. I smiled and nodded. "You're good?" I said, and meant it. Family parties had become a kind of obstacle course. Not loud danger, just the quiet kind, the jokes that weren't jokes, the patience that wore thin in rooms where people spoke fast and interrupted faster. My son's stutter came and went, worse when he was excited or watched too closely. He knew it. We all did. What I didn't know was whether anyone else had to treat it with care. The party was for my nephew's birthday. Backyard, folding chairs, a long table with aluminum trays sweating in the heat. Everyone hugged too long, commented on how tall my son was getting, how brave he was for talking so much at school. I cataloged each word the way I always did, not to build a case, just to know where we stood. My nephew was already holding court by the time the cake came out. He was 17 and loud in that untested way, performing for attention like it was oxygen. When my son tried to ask if there was chocolate icing, the sentence snagged on itself. A small hitch. Then another. My nephew leaned forward, eyes bright. "Spit it out, man," he said, stretching the words into a caricature. He did it again, mimicking the rhythm, exaggerating the pauses. Someone laughed. Then someone else. The sound spread before I could stand up, like a ripple you can't outrun once it's started. I watched my son's shoulders lift, then lock. He stopped trying to speak. He looked at me, not pleading, just checking whether this was one of the moments we were supposed to endure. I didn't shout. I didn't say my nephew's name. I stood, walked to the table, and said, "We're leaving." The room stalled. Forks paused midair. My sister frowned like I'd broken a rule she hadn't explained yet. "Relax," she said. "He's kidding." I looked at my son, then back at the table. "Everyone needs to go," I said evenly. "The party's over." There were protests. Confused laughter, someone muttering about sensitivity, another person telling my nephew to apologize. If it offended you. No one did the thing that mattered. So I gathered the leftover food into bags, handed them out without ceremony, and held the door. My nephew rolled his eyes as he passed. "Wow," he said. "Drama much?" I didn't respond. That was important. Silence is often the first boundary people actually feel. The drive home was quiet. My son stared out the window, tracing patterns in the glass with his finger. After a while, I mess up. "No," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, accepting it the way children sometimes do, not because they believe it yet, but because they trust the source. When we got home, he went straight to bed. I sat at the kitchen table until the house settled back into itself. The text came an hour later. "You embarrassed the family today. You're exaggerating. Until you apologize, stay away from this family." It was my mother's voice distilled into pixels, the calm authority, the assumption that harmony was a thing children disrupted and adults restored by smoothing it over. I read it twice, not to absorb the sting. There wasn't much left, but to hear the familiar closing of ranks. I didn't answer right away. I opened the folder on my laptop that I rarely touched. It held statements and agreements, notes from meetings years ago after my father died. A trust account set up to provide stability for everyone, administered by me because I was good with details. I hadn't asked for the role. I'd accepted it because someone had to be steady. The rules were clear. Disbursements were contingent on conduct that didn't endanger beneficiaries. The language was dry, almost kind in its neutrality. It didn't care about jokes or laughter. It cared about patterns and responsibility. I typed slowly. "Then I will disconnect you from the trust account," I wrote. "Effective immediately. And then we can talk about apologies." I didn't add explanations. I didn't mention my son. I didn't threaten. I stated a fact in a sequence. The reply didn't come for a long time. When it did, it wasn't from my mother. My aunt called first, her voice cautious, practical. "She didn't mean it like that," she said. "She was upset." "I understand." The account is paused. There was a pause on the line this time, a recalibration you could hear. She asked what it would take to restore access. I told her the same thing I'd written, an acknowledgement of what happened and a commitment that it wouldn't happen again. Not to me. To my son. The next message from my mother was shorter. Less declarative. She asked if I was serious. Yes. I replied. The house was quiet. My son slept through the night for the first time in weeks. In the morning, he came into the kitchen and started telling me about a dream. He stumbled on a word and laughed at himself, then kept going. I didn't correct him. I listened. There was no dramatic reconciliation that day, no tearful apology. The family didn't suddenly understand. But the tone changed. Calls became careful. Invitations came with conditions. My nephew didn't text an apology. His mother did, awkwardly, as if translating a foreign language. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Protection has weight. It costs you rooms you used to stand in, voices you used to hear without effort. It also gives you back something quieter, the ability to sit at your own table without scanning for danger. Weeks later, my mother asked to meet. Just us. She brought coffee and spoke about misunderstandings, about how everyone was raised differently. I listened until she finished, then asked her to explain why laughter had seemed more important than a child's dignity. She didn't have an answer ready. That was new. When we parted, nothing was resolved in the way people like to package endings. The family remained restricted. The family remained distant. My son Stutter remained part of him, neither tragedy nor punchline. What changed was simpler and harder to undo. When he speaks now, and the words take their time, I don't rush him. Neither does anyone who wants a place at our table.